So today our learning objective is going to be that students will be able to identify grammatical structure noticing using the following sentence. So our sentence says, after Curly's wife threatens to cry rape in Of Mice and Men, it becomes clear that she believes she holds a lot of power, but it turns out that she is the least powerful of any character in the novel. So who can name one of the grammatical structures that we see? No? Which one? So Curly is capitalized, good. We're going to put number 1 next to that. So we know that if it's a name or a proper title, we're definitely going to capitalize it.
The title, Of Mice and Men, is capitalized?
That's right. So it's capitalized, and what else is going on with it?
It's in
It's
italics.
in italics. Good job. One second. So why do we put titles in italics? Yeah. Why do we use italics? Like to identify it? Yeah. It's the title of the book, so it's like proper. Okay. What was the one that you said? Yeah. Where? That's not a list, but what it is, remember when we talked about independent and dependent clauses? So after Curly's wife threatens to cry rape in Of Mice and Men, could that be a sentence? Could I erase this comma and put a period there?
Yeah.
No, would that be a sentence though? After Curly's wife threatens to cry rape in Of Mice and Men?
No.
That's not a sentence, right? So we put that comma there, so we know that this is independent, or this one is dependent, sorry. And independent. It becomes clear that she believes she holds a lot of power. So that can be a sentence all by itself. So that one could stand by itself. So that's going to be independent. Remember when we talked about like the difference? So dependent, like you guys are dependent on your parents for support, for food, to buy you clothes, everything. Independent, like I'm independent. I don't rely on people to buy me clothes because I have a job. I don't live there. So that's the difference. So that's the same way with sentences. If it doesn't make sense by itself, then we know it's going to be dependent. And then what came before our dependent sentence? What is this? A wubis word, after. So we know that it's going to be a dependent clause when we have our wubis, after. Okay, what else do we see? Fanboy, where's our fanboy? Comma, but. Okay, so we have our fanboy, but, and what does that do? What does our fanboy do? That's right, it separates two sentences. So it's separating, it becomes clear that she believes she holds a lot of power, comma, but it turns out that she is the least powerful of any character in the novel. Okay. Great job, guys. Okay, so let's talk about what happened at the end of chapter 3. Who can make an inference based on like what they read, what they think is going to happen in chapter 4? So first, what happened in chapter 3? How did it end? Lenny and Curly fought. Why were they fighting?
We have to do the right.
That's right. So Curly was looking for his wife, and he was kind of like looking around, trying to find out who he can fight with, and everybody probably looked kind of intimidating to him, but he knew that Lenny was kind of weaker, like in the mind, not in strength, of course. So he goes over to Lenny, and what does he do? He hits him. And what does Lenny do? He hit him back, and Lenny really hurt him. So what do we think from that is going to happen in chapter 4? So you think in chapter 4 there's going to be another fight?
I think he's going to talk about it, what's going on. I'm not really sure. I think Curly's going to tell him.
So you think Curly's going to tell on Lenny to his dad?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's going to happen if Curly tells his dad, who is the boss of the ranch? What do you think is going to happen to Lenny and George? Yeah, they're going to get fired. which means if they get fired, what can't they do? What do they want to do?
Get paid.
They want to get paid. So why do they want to get paid? What's their whole purpose in working?
To go to the
Ranch.
farm.
Yeah, they want their own farm. So like Lenny can have the rabbits he keeps talking about. George can have a place to call his own. So if all that, they will never get that if they get fired. So what we're going to do now is we're going to read and annotate the first page of chapter 4. So get your pens out. I'm going to ask you guys some questions about this too. So, Crooks, the Negro stable buck, had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room, there was a square, 4-paneled window. On the other, a narrow plank door leading into the barn. So, based off of that, you think there's animals in there? Is Crooks sleeping like in the same cage as the animal? Yeah? So I mean I'm just gonna monitor for meaning on that. You guys can write that down on your papers as well.
Like underline all of it.
You can underline the part that says a narrow plank door leading into the barn, because we know who's usually in a barn? Animals. Okay. Crook's bunk was a long box filled with straw, on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window, there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself, a little bench for leather working tools, curved knives and needles, and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with the horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its lever covering splits. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. So that kind of answered our question before about whether there's animals or not sleeping in this room, because if he has medicine for himself and the horses, we can probably assume that they're also in there. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar with its paintbrush sticking over the edge. And scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions. For being alone, Crooks could leave things about, and being a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and had accumulated more possessions than he can carry on his back. So it talked about him being crippled. Do we remember what's wrong with Crooks in the previous chapters? It was his back.
Oh.
Remember how I was talking about he's like kind of bent over? So, yeah. And it's saying he's more permanent than the other men. So what does that mean? When somebody's permanent.
Like, we'll stay there longer than everyone else.
Yeah, so he's been working there for a while. We know that a lot of men kind of come and go with this line of work. So since Crooks has so much stuff, he's probably been there for a while. Okay. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barreled shotgun. And he had books too, a tattered dictionary, and a malted copy of the California Civil Code for 1905. So I kind of underlined at that because I was like, what, does anybody know what a civil code is, first of all? Civil code is kind of like the laws. So he has like a book of the laws from California in 1905. So it's kind of interesting because like we know that he's black and like a lot of black people at that time did not have, or any black people at that time didn't have any rights. So and the rights they did have are very, very few. So it's kind of interesting that Crooks has the civil code for 1905. And then it's also interesting that we can tell he likes to read. And we'll find more about that later. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large gold-rimmed spectacles hung from a nail on the wall above his bed. Everybody knows what spectacles are, right?
Yeah.
What?
Glasses.
Yep. The room was swept and fairly neat, for Crooks was a proud, aloof man. He kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. Does everybody know what aloof means? Do you have a guess about what aloof might mean? Using the context clues? It says he was a proud, aloof man. No, I'm still building on that. Aloof, nice, you said? So aloof kind of means like, because they use the word proud, so we can probably infer that aloof means that he's above things, like he doesn't care. Like if, I'm aloof to what Ariana is saying, that means I feel like I'm above it. So Crooks feels like he's above the other men and like what they're doing and what they're saying. His body was bent over to the left of his crooked spine, and his eyes lay deep in his head, and because of their depth seemed to glitter with intensity. So glitter with intensity, it's not really comparing it to anything, so we know that it's not going to be a metaphor. But what could it be? Glittering with intensity, his eyes. No. I would say imagery, because you know when you can kind of picture somebody's eyes glimmering, right?
Yeah.
His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pain-tightened lips, which were lighter than his face. So pain-tightened lips. What can we say about that? Like, what does that say about Crooks? If his lips are pain-tightened. It probably means that he's had a pretty hard, painful life, right? He hasn't had an easy life. Like, he's not talking about he's smiling, but he has a happy, bubbly face. He has a pain-tightened lips. So that's probably saying that his life has been pretty difficult. And I didn't say this before, but going back, we know that a lot of this too was setting. Like, you can probably bracket all of that page because that's all setting. It's talking about where Crooks is, where he sleeps. We know that he's sleeping where?
In the barn.
In the barn, right? And we can probably infer also that he's sleeping with the animals. And we also notice too, he's separate from the other men. He's not sleeping in the bunkhouse, right? Where the other men sleep. And why do we think he's separated? It did say that he doesn't like people in his space, but no. What do we know about Crooks? He's what?
Independent.
Well, he's black. He doesn't want to be separate from choice, but because of the time period, he's separated because he's black. So he sleeps out in the stables, and he is a stable black. So, all right. So what we're gonna do now is you guys are gonna read the rest of chapter 4, and you're gonna annotate it in about 10 minutes. We're gonna talk about what you've annotated.